What happens when the most powerful empire in the galaxy, a civilization that has conquered stars and tamed nebulas, is forced to its knees? They weren't broken by a rival fleet. They weren't conquered by a cosmic god. They were humbled by a single broken man living on a planet so hostile, the universe itself seemed to want him dead. To the galaxy he was a primitive survivor on a death world. To the Empire he was a ghost. But when the smoke cleared and the truth was revealed, 3 hardened alien super soldiers dropped their weapons and bowed in shame. Because they realized that while they had the technology to destroy worlds, this human possessed the sheer, terrifying will to survive them. This is the story of how one man's refusal to die changed the fate of an interstellar dynasty. Welcome back to Echoes of Sci-Fi. If you love stories where humanity proves that grit and determination outweigh advanced technology every time, you are in the right place. Before we dive into this epic saga, do me a favor. Smash that like button to help feed the algorithm and hit subscribe so you never miss a tale from the archives. Also, drop a comment down below telling me where in the world, or the galaxy, you are watching from today. I love seeing how far our signals reach. Now let's enter the atmosphere. The forest held its breath in the gathering dusk, every shadow deepening into pools of potential death. On the planet known in the galactic charts as Tartarus 7, silence wasn't peace, it was a threat assessment. This world was a Class-5 Deathworld, a celestial body that seemed to have evolved with a singular biological imperative, to kill anything that walked on its surface. The gravity was crushing, 30% heavier than Earth standard, turning every step into a workout and every fall into a potential bone fracture. The air was thin, laced with sulfur and heavy metals, demanding lungs that could filter toxins as efficiently as they drew oxygen. And moving through this green and blue hellscape was a ghost. His name was Rhys Varkis. At 40 years old, his body bore the topographic map of 7 brutal years lived alone on this unforgiving rock. Every scar on his skin told a story of a near miss with mortality. Every callus on his hands marked a lesson learned through pain, blood, and the kind of bone-deep exhaustion that civilization had long forgotten. His face was weathered leather, carved by the harsh, radioactive winds and the unrelenting sun into harsh planes and deep lines. But his eyes, those obsidian chips of focused intensity, remained sharp, missing nothing in the dimming light. Rhys wasn't just surviving anymore. He was the apex predator in a world of monsters. Right now, those eyes were tracking a creature that had eluded him for 3 long days. It was a void stalker, a local predator with fur that rippled in shades of electric blue and deep indigo, providing natural camouflage among the bluish vegetation of Tartarus 7. This beast moved like liquid shadow, intelligent and deadly. It had killed twice in the territory Rhys considered his own, stealing grazing animals from his stores. To a human from a soft-core world, this would be a monster to flee from. To Rhys it was just a Tuesday. It was competition. He crouched beside a tree trunk as thick as a colony hab block, studying the fresh claw marks scored deep into the bark. The wood was still weeping sap, which meant the creature had passed within the last hour. He pressed his fingers into the grooves, feeling the depth and angle. He wasn't just looking, he was reading the story written in the destruction. The predator was large, perhaps 300 pounds of dense, high-gravity muscle and fang, moving eastward toward the broken stone ravines. In his hands, Rhys held a weapon that bridged the gap between the Stone Age and the Space Age. It was a bow carved from ironwood, a local timber so dense it could stop a low-velocity bullet, strung with sinew harvested from a 6-legged grazer he'd tracked for 2 weeks. In his quiver, the arrows were fletched with the iridescent blue-green feathers of cliff birds he'd risked his life to collect. He had climbed sheer canyon walls to get those feathers, not for vanity, but because on Tartarus 7 aerodynamics meant the difference between dinner and death. He didn't miss civilization. Or so he told himself during the long nights when sleep wouldn't come, and memories pressed against his mind like physical weights. He remembered the CSV Erebus Dawn. The colony ship had carried 217 souls, families seeking a new start on a world the survey teams had promised would be paradise. They lied. Or maybe they just died before they could update the charts. The atmospheric entry had gone catastrophically wrong, systems failing in cascading waves of fire and screaming metal. Rhys had been in the cargo hold when the explosions tore the ship apart. He remembered the taste of blood, the desperate scramble through smoke, and the solitude of the escape pod. Only one pod made it to the surface intact. When he finally trekked to the main crash site of the Erebus Dawn, walking for 3 days toward a pillar of smoke, he found only twisted metal and silence. 43 colonists he had known by name were gone. He spent 2 weeks digging graves in the rocky soil with bleeding hands, building cairns over people who had dreamed of new lives. After burying the last body, a child of 8 named Sarah who loved to draw, Rhys walked away and never looked back. He headed south, putting distance between himself and the ghosts. For the first year he expected to die. Starvation, predators, disease, gravity, this world offered 1,000 ways to end him. But humanity is a stubborn thing. We are Deathworlders by nature. We don't just adapt, we conquer. Rhys studied the plants, testing them on himself in tiny amounts. He observed the animals, learning their territories and weaknesses. He forged weapons from the scraps of the Erebus dawn scattered across the landscape. And slowly, day by day, the desperate refugee died, and the survivor was born. Snap back to the present. The Void Stalker broke cover just as the last sliver of the sun touched the horizon. It was even larger than Rhys had estimated, matching a terrestrial tiger in size, with a head broad and flat, filled with curved fangs designed for crushing bone. Its eyes glowed with bioluminescent amber, a trait that helped its night vision but betrayed its position to a careful observer. Rhys didn't aim in the conventional sense. After 7 years, the bow was an extension of his body, the arrow an extension of his will. He released. The arrow flew true and silent, crossing 40 feet in less than a second. It took the predator through the throat, punching through the windpipe and lodging against the spine. The beast's roar was cut short, drowned in blood, and it crashed into the undergrowth. Rhys waited a full minute. He knew better than to rush a dying thing. Wounded animals on Tartarus, 7 were often more dangerous than healthy ones. When he finally approached, he knelt beside the carcass, placing a hand on its still warm flank. He closed his eyes, acknowledging the kill with respect. This creature had fought for survival just as he did. Its death meant he would live another week, another month. By the time he had dressed the meat and hefted the carrying frame onto his shoulders, full night had fallen. The temperature dropped rapidly, the thin atmosphere unable to retain the day's heat. But the cold wasn't the problem. The air had that electric quality that preceded the violent weather systems of this region. The storm was coming. Not a gentle rain, but a Tartarus 7 deluge, lightning that struck like artillery and winds that could strip flesh from bone. Rhys quickened his pace. He needed to reach his dugout, a shelter carved into a cliff face and hidden behind a screen of thorny vines. He was checking his water catchment barrels when the sky tore open. It wasn't lightning. The light was a brilliant white-blue, transforming night into noon, casting stark shadows that seemed to vibrate. Rhys looked up, eyes narrowing against the glare, and saw a streak of fire carving across the cloud layer. Something massive was falling from orbit, trailing flames and debris. Its trajectory was steep, uncontrolled. It wasn't a meteor. It was artificial. A ship. Rhys watched it disappear beyond the western ridge 2 miles distant. The impact turned the horizon into a wall of fire. A rolling boom shook the ground beneath his feet, rattling his bones. A pillar of fire rose from the crash site, illuminating the churning storm clouds from below. He stood in the gathering rain, staring at the inferno. Every instinct honed by 7 years of survival screamed at him to stay put. Secure the shelter. Wait out the storm. Whatever crashed wasn't his problem. He owed nothing to the universe that had stranded him here. But then the memories hit him. He remembered being trapped in the wreckage of the Erebus dawn. He remembered the desperate minutes before he opened the hatch. He remembered the screaming for help that never came. He remembered the silence that answered his cries. If someone had been there, if someone had come for them. Rhys cursed, a harsh sound in the thunder. He stepped back into his dugout and gathered his emergency gear with quick, economical movements. His battle knife, 14 inches of salvaged steel sharpened to a razor edge. His hand axe, a coil of braided plant fiber rope. His bow. He wrapped everything in oiled leather and stepped out into the storm. The journey was a nightmare march. The rain fell like a solid wall, hammering down with enough force to bruise. Lightning cracked overhead, close enough that Rhys could smell the ozone burning the air. The forest floor became a treacherous maze of mud that tried to suck his boots off with every step. He crossed a raging torrent of a stream, balancing on a fallen log, feeling the water clawing at his legs. Twice he heard the territorial roars of nocturnal predators, massive things that hunted in the chaos of the storm. But Rhys moved with the practiced silence of a ghost, skirting their territories. He wasn't prey tonight. He was on a mission. The glow from the crash site grew stronger, a hellish orange-red that pulsed with each gust of wind. The chemical stench of burning reached him long before he crested the ridge, acrid, bitter, and wrong. When he looked down into the crater, he froze. The spacecraft was unlike anything humanity had ever built. It wasn't the blocky, utilitarian design of Earth ships. This hull was smooth and organic, flowing curves with no visible seams, made from an alloy that shifted colors even as it burned. Blue, silver, and gold rippled across the surface. It was beautiful and it was shattered. The impact had torn the ship open. Flames licked across the main hull, burning in colors that shouldn't exist in nature. Green flames, purple flames, fire that burned bright blue but cast no heat. The rain evaporated before it could extinguish anything. Rhys slid down the slope, the heat pressing against his face even from 50 yards away. He pulled his leather jerkin over his nose and mouth, squinting against the stinging smoke. The crater floor was a graveyard of debris. He stepped over melted crystal control panels and twisted bulkheads that glowed dull red. He could hear the ship dying, groans of tortured metal, hisses of escaping gas. And then, beneath the chaos, he heard it. A sound so faint he almost missed it. A sound so human, so vulnerable it stopped his heart. A child was crying. It was a whimper, a soft sob, the universal language of a young thing in pain and fear. Rhys's head whipped around. There, to his left, partially buried under a collapsed section of hull plating, something small was moving. Rhys ran. The heat became unbearable. He felt his exposed skin beginning to blister, his lungs burning with every breath of the superheated air. But he didn't slow down. He couldn't. He reached the collapsed section and dropped to his knees. She was impossibly small, a child no more than 6 years old, pinned beneath a metal beam as thick as Rhys's thigh. And she wasn't human. Her skin was blue, a rich, deep cobalt, the color of the ocean on a clear day. Her hair was darker, almost purple-black, matted with ash. Her eyes were large, luminous, and alien, but the terror in them was something Rhys recognized instantly. She was scrabbling at the beam, her strength nearly gone. Rhys didn't hesitate. He jammed his hands under the beam, feeling the metal sear his palms even through his calluses. The pain was blinding, but he shoveled it into the furnace of his adrenaline. He braced his feet and lifted. It didn't budge. Gravity on Tartarus 7 was a cruel mistress and alien alloys were heavy. Rhys roared, a primal sound of pure effort. He engaged every muscle in his body, his back and legs screaming in protest. Move, he commanded. Move or she dies. The beam shifted. An inch. Then 2. Rhys's vision grayed at the edges. His body shook violently, veins bulging at his temples. He was a human, a Deathworlder, and he refused to let gravity win. With a final, agonizing heave, he lifted the beam a foot off the ground. The girl slid free. Rhys dropped the beam and scooped her up. She weighed almost nothing, a bundle of fragile bones and soft flesh. He turned and ran, stumbling over debris, operating on pure instinct. Behind him, the ship's core detonated. A massive, hollow boom sent a shockwave rolling across the crater. The blast picked Rhys up and threw him forward like a leaf in a hurricane. He hit the ground hard, curling his body around the child, taking the brunt of the impact on his back and shoulders. They tumbled down the slope in a cascade of loose earth and gravel. When they finally stopped, Rhys forced his battered body to stand. He kept running until the heat was just a memory and the forest swallowed them whole. He collapsed against a tree trunk, legs finally giving out. The girl lay against him, shaking violently. Rhys looked down at her properly for the first time. Her skin was definitely blue, not painted, but natural. Her fingers were long and delicate, tipped with translucent nails. Her clothes were melted and charred, but the fabric that remained was elegant, covered in strange symbols. She stared up at him with those enormous eyes, cycling between terror and confusion. She spoke, a melodic series of sounds like singing glass. When he didn't respond, she tried again, gripping his torn jerkin. Rhys wished he could tell her she was safe. But words were useless here. So he did the only thing he could. He shifted his grip, cradling her against his chest the way he had once carried his niece before the Erebus dawn took everything from him. "You're okay," he rasped, his voice ruined by smoke. "I've got you." He stood on shaking legs and began the long walk back to his shelter. By the time they reached the dugout, Rhys was running on fumes. His hands were badly burned, the skin blackened and split. His back felt like a single massive bruise. But the girl was alive. He laid her on his sleeping pallet, a collection of furs and dried grasses. He built up the fire, his clumsy, ruined hands shaking as he fed the flames. He heated water in a battered metal pot salvaged from his own crash site years ago. He cleaned her wounds gently. She flinched at first, but as he worked with slow, deliberate movements, she relaxed. Her skin was cooler than a human's but not cold. When he offered her water in a wooden cup, she drank desperately, spilling it down her chin. Rhys sat back to bind his own hands. The girl watched him, her eyes tracking the bandages. Suddenly she made a sound. She pointed to his hands, then touched her own chest, then pointed at him again. She was connecting the dots. She realized he had burned himself pulling her from the fire. Rhys nodded. He mimed lifting something heavy. The girl's eyes widened. She spoke a string of musical syllables, her tone earnest and filled with gratitude. Rhys smiled, a rusty expression he hadn't used in years. "I'm Rhys," he said, pointing to his chest. She hesitated, then tapped her own chest. "Cerys," she whispered. "Cerys. Cerys," Rhys repeated. It sounded like the wind through the crystal canyons to the north. Over the next few weeks, a strange routine emerged in the dugout. Rhys, the hardened survivalist, became a teacher. Cerys, the alien child, became a student of the wild. He taught her which berries were safe and which would stop her heart. He showed her how to walk silently, placing her feet to avoid snapping twigs. He discovered that her blue skin was a perfect camouflage among the indigo plants of Tartarus 7. She learned fast. Too fast for a human child. Her species, the Aeluri, were clearly highly intelligent. But the trauma was there. At night she would wake up screaming. Rhys would sit by the fire, letting her hold onto his arm until she fell back asleep. He taught her to use a small knife he fashioned from scrap metal, showing her how to defend herself. He hated teaching a child violence, but this world didn't care about innocence. 3 weeks after the crash, the illusion of safety shattered. Rhys was checking his trap lines a mile from the shelter when he found it. A section of the forest had been disturbed. No tracks, but the undergrowth was trampled in a regular, artificial pattern. He searched the ground and found a device half buried in the mud. It was a metal sphere, smooth and seamless, pulsing with a faint light. Alien tech. Someone was looking for her. Rhys's blood ran cold. The ship that crashed hadn't been empty. There were others. And now they were sweeping the forest, methodical and precise. They were hunting. He covered the device and moved back toward the shelter, his mind racing. Were they rescuers? Or were they the reason she crashed in the first place? On a death world, you assume the worst until the gun is pointed away from you. Rhys Varkis tightened his grip on his bow. He had survived the Erebus dawn. He had survived 7 years of hell. He wasn't about to let anyone take the only family he had left without a fight. The days that followed the discovery of the alien device were a lesson in high-stakes paranoia. Rhys Varkis knew he was being hunted, and on a death world like Tartarus 7, being hunted usually meant you were already dead. You just didn't know it yet. But Rhys wasn't a local animal, and he wasn't a panicked refugee. He was human. He was a creature born of adaptability and spite, and he decided that if these visitors wanted to find him, he was going to make them work for it. He began altering their routines, turning their existence into a game of ghosts. He taught Cerys how to vanish. It wasn't just about being quiet, it was about becoming part of the background static of the forest. He showed her how to walk on the hard-packed roots of the iron oaks to avoid leaving footprints in the mud. He taught her to wade through the freezing streams for miles, letting the water wash away their scent, scrubbing their thermal signature clean against the cold currents. Rhys spent his nights awake, crafting defenses that were brutal in their simplicity. He couldn't match the technology of a spacefaring empire, so he didn't try. Instead, he weaponized the planet. He strung tripwires made of braided vine that, when snagged, would drop hives of aggressive stinging beetles onto the path below. He dug ankle-breaker pits masked by layers of moss, not deep enough to kill, but deep enough to shatter the leg of anything that stepped wrong in this crushing gravity. He was turning his territory into a fortress of thorns and mud. More evidence of the searchers appeared. A second device, larger this time, humming with a frequency that made Rhys's teeth ache. He found it scanning a patch of riverbank. He didn't touch it. Instead, he watched it from the tree-line, observing its patterns. It was thorough, methodical, and terrified him. This wasn't a rescue mission. This was a grid search. It was a military sweep. Cerys sensed the tension. The playful child who had been learning to weave flower crowns from bluethorn vines vanished, replaced by a silent, watchful shadow. She gripped the small knife Rhys had given her like a talisman. When he signaled for silence, she turned to stone. When he pointed to cover, she flowed into the undergrowth like water. They developed a silent language of hand signals and eye contact, a bond forged in the crucible of survival. 4 weeks after the crash, the net tightened. Rhys found the tracks. They were near the northern ridge, fresh impressions in the soft loam near a watering hole. They weren't animal tracks. They were bipedal, booted, and heavy. But what chilled Rhys wasn't the shape, it was the discipline. The tracks moved in a perfect tactical formation, covering each other's blind spots. Rhys knelt by the prints, his mind racing. 3 of them, he muttered, tracing the outline of a boot tread that looked like a honeycomb lattice. Moving fast. Carrying heavy gear. He looked up at the canopy. The birds had stopped singing. The forest was holding its breath. They weren't just close, they were here. "We move," Rhys said, his voice a low growl. "Now." He didn't bother returning to the dugout. He had prepared grab bags for this exact scenario. He hoisted his pack, checking the weight of his ironwood bow and the machete at his hip. Saris shouldered her small bundle without a word, her eyes wide and dark. They headed for the Devil's Teeth, a formation of jagged obsidian spires 3 miles to the east. It was a nightmare of broken stone and narrow ravines, treacherous for anyone who didn't know the terrain, but defensible for someone who did. The trek was grueling. The gravity of Tartarus, 7 seemed to increase with their desperation, pulling at their limbs, demanding a toll for every step. Rhys led the way, hacking through vines that wept purple sap, his senses dialed to their absolute limit. He felt the forest watching them. He felt the crosshairs he couldn't see. They reached the edge of a small clearing, a patch of open ground surrounded by towering fern trees. Rhys stopped. The hair on the back of his neck stood up, a primal warning system that had kept humanity alive since the days of the saber-toothed tiger. "Down," he hissed, shoving Saris behind the thick trunk of a fallen tree. He spun around, drawing his machete in one smooth motion, his other hand gripping his handaxe. The air in front of them shimmered. It wasn't magic, it was optics. 3 figures decloaked, stepping out of the distortion as if they were walking through a curtain of water. They were magnificent and terrifying. These were not the desperate survivors of a crash. These were warriors. They stood nearly 7 feet tall, encased in armor that looked like it had been grown rather than forged, sleek, chitinous plates in shifting shades of forest green and twilight blue. The armor hugged their bodies, highlighting musculature that made them look like Greek statues brought to life. Their helmets were smooth and faceless, glowing with a soft, menacing V-shaped visor light. In their hands they held weapons that hummed with contained energy, rifles that looked like they could punch a hole through a tank, let alone a human in cured leather. Rhys stepped in front of Saris, interposing his battered body between the child and the high-tech kill squad. He was outgunned, out-armored, and outnumbered. He was a man with a sharp piece of metal facing gods of war. And he didn't flinch. He adopted a combat stance, knees bent, weapons ready. He knew he was going to die. He accepted it in a heartbeat. But he made a silent vow. "The first one is coming with me." The lead alien soldier raised a hand. It wasn't an attack, it was a halt signal. The figure spoke, a rapid-fire burst of clicks and melodic tones amplified by the helmet speakers. It sounded commanding, imperious. Rhys didn't understand the words, but he understood the tone. Surrender. Comply. Submit. Not today, Rhys growled in English, his voice rough with grit. You take another step and we find out what color you bleed. The aliens paused. They seemed confused by this small, ragged creature barring their path. The lead soldier took a step forward, weapon raising slightly. The universal language of escalation. Rhys tensed, muscles coiling to spring. No. The scream came from behind him. Saris darted out from the safety of the log. Saris, get back. Rhys roared, trying to grab her, but she was too fast. She threw herself between Rhys and the soldiers, spreading her small arms wide. She shouted something in their language, high, piercing, and authoritative. It wasn't the cry of a child, it was a command. The effect was instantaneous and shocking. The 3 alien soldiers froze. The lead soldier's weapon dropped to his side as if it had suddenly become red hot. The other 2 lowered their rifles, their body language shifting from aggression to absolute, paralyzing terror. Saris continued to speak, her voice trembling but fierce. She pointed at Rhys, then at herself, then mimed the fire, the lifting of the beam, the long nights of protection. She was telling them the story. The lead soldier slowly reached up and disengaged the seals of his helmet. A hiss of pressurized gas escaped, and he pulled the helmet free. The face beneath was striking. He was Aeluri unmistakably. His skin was a deep, royal azure, darker than Saris's. His eyes were gold, slit-pupilled like a cat's, and his features were sharp, angular, and predatory. But right now, those predator eyes were filled with something that looked suspiciously like awe. This was Praetor Dax Draven, leader of the Imperial Guard's elite retrieval unit. And he looked like he had just seen a ghost. Dax Draven looked at the human, This scarred, dirty, primitive creature standing ready to fight a plasma rifle with a piece of scrap metal. Then he looked at Saris, seeing the clean bandages on her arms, the fed belly, the protective stance of the human. He understood. The Praetor moved. He didn't attack. He stepped forward, holstered his weapon with a deliberate, loud click and dropped to both knees. It was a heavy, ceremonial motion. The armor clattered against the stones. He bowed his head, exposing his neck, the ultimate sign of trust and submission. Behind him, the other two soldiers did the exact same thing. 3 super soldiers, the elite of an interstellar empire, kneeling in the mud of a death world before a confused human in a leather jacket. Rhys lowered his axe, his heart hammering against his ribs. What are they doing? Saris turned to him, tears streaming down her face. She tugged on his hand. Rhys, hero, she said in broken English, struggling to find the words. They say, thank you. They say, death. Big death. Rhys looked at the kneeling giants. He felt a strange tightening in his chest. He hadn't done it for this. He hadn't done it for gratitude. He did it because he couldn't listen to a child cry. Tell them to get up, Rhys muttered, feeling profoundly uncomfortable. The mud is full of parasites. Saris giggled, a wet, teary sound, and spoke to the soldiers. They rose, but their demeanor had changed completely. They no longer looked at Rhys as a threat or a local savage. They looked at him with a mixture of curiosity and profound respect. Praetor Dax stepped forward, keeping his hands visible. He spoke slowly, his voice deep and resonant. He placed a fist over his heart, then extended his hand, palm up. He wants you to come, Saris translated, her English improving with the adrenaline. To the ship. To go home. Home, Rhys echoed. The word tasted like ash. He looked back at the forest, at the shadows where he had lived for 7 years. Then he looked at Saris. She was gripping his hand so hard her knuckles were white. I go where you go, kid, Rhys said. The trek back to the alien landing zone was surreal. The Aeluri soldiers formed a protective phalanx around Rhys and Saris. They moved with a lethal grace that Rhys admired. He watched them, analyzing their discipline. They were good. Very good. But he noticed they struggled with the gravity, their breathing slightly labored. They relied on their powered armor to compensate. Rhys walked under his own power, carrying his own gear, matching their pace without breaking a sweat. He caught Praetor Dax watching him, the alien's golden eyes scanning Rhys's scars, his primitive weapons, his easy stride. It was the look of one warrior recognizing another. They reached the forward base camp at twilight. It was a marvel of engineering. Modular structures glowed with soft light, protected by energy fields that hummed in the air. As the group entered the perimeter, other Aeluri emerged from tents. When they saw Saris, a wave of noise erupted, cries of relief, shouts of joy. But when they saw the human walking beside her, the camp went silent. Dax barked a command. He gestured to Rhys, then to Saris. He spoke a few short, sharp sentences. The effect rippled through the camp. Aliens stopped what they were doing. Technicians dropped data pads. Guards lowered weapons. One by one, they turned to Rhys and placed a fist over their hearts, bowing slightly. It was suffocating. Rhys just wanted a corner to sit in. Saris was immediately surrounded by medics, slender Aeluri with silver robes and floating medical scanners. They tried to usher her away to a pristine white tent. Saris dug her heels in. No, she shouted in English, panic flaring in her eyes. She reached back for Rhys. Rhys. Stay. The medics looked confused, trying to gently pull her. Rhys stepped forward. The guards tensed, but Dax barked a sharp order and they stood down. Rhys knelt so he was eye level with Saris. I'm here, he said, ignoring the aliens hovering around them. I'm not going anywhere. I promised, remember? Saris searched his face looking for the truth. She found it. She nodded, wiped her nose, and allowed the medics to lead her away, looking back over her shoulder every few seconds to make sure he was still there. Rhys was escorted to a separate structure. It wasn't a cell, it was too nice for that. There were cushions, a low table with strange fruits, and a climate control system that scrubbed the sulfur from the air. But there were 2 guards at the door. Rhys sat on the edge of the sleeping platform, cleaning his fingernails with his knife. He was exhausted, but his mind was wiring. He was in the belly of the beast now. An hour later, the door hissed open. Praetor Dax walked in. He was out of his armor now, wearing a dark bodysuit that showed off his terrifying physique. He carried 2 metal flasks. He sat across from Rhys, cross-legged on the floor. He placed one flask in front of Rhys and opened the other. The smell of something sharp and alcoholic filled the room. Dax took a swig, then pointed to Rhys's flask. Rhys picked it up. He sniffed it. It smelled like jet fuel and cinnamon. He took a sip. It burned all the way down, then settled into a warm glow in his stomach. Not bad, Rhys rasped. Dax tapped a device on his wrist. A holographic projection flickered between them. It was a translation matrix. Human, the device spoke, the voice synthetic and flat. I am Dax Draven. You have questions. Rhys looked at the alien. Just one. Who is she? Dax looked at the flask, swirling the liquid. She is Cerys Vale, daughter of the High Archon, the firstborn of the throne. Rhys let out a long breath. A princess. More than a princess, Dax corrected. She is the future of the Aeluri people. And you? Dax leaned forward, his golden eyes intense. You are the man who pulled the future out of a fire. I just did what had to be done, Rhys said. That, Dax said, a hint of a smile touching his alien lips, is what makes you dangerous, human. You do not understand what you have done. You have shamed an empire. Shamed? We have fleets. We have armies. We have scanners that can read a heartbeat from orbit. And yet, Dax gestured to Rhys's scarred hands. It was a man with a stick and a piece of string who saved her. My men, they are humbled. They kneel because they know they could not have survived what you have survived. Rhys took another drink of the alien liquor. This world, he said quietly, it strips you down. You either get hard or you get dead. We call this planet Tartarus 7, Dax said. The Hell World. We do not land here unless we must. Our sensors say the gravity alone should crush your joints. The air should poison you. Yet you thrive. I wouldn't call it thriving, Rhys grunted. Just stubborn. Dax laughed, a deep, barking sound. Stubborn. Yes. A human trait, I see. The Praetor stood up. Rest, Rhys Varkis. Tomorrow the High Archon arrives. The Emperor himself comes to claim his daughter. And he will want to meet the ghost who kept her alive. Dax paused at the door. Warning, human. The Emperor, he is not like me. He does not kneel easily. The door hissed shut, leaving Rhys alone with the silence. He lay back on the cushions, staring at the ceiling. He had spent 7 years praying for a ship to take him off this rock. Now a fleet had arrived. But as he closed his eyes, he didn't dream of rescue. He dreamed of the look on Cerys's face when the soldiers raised their guns. He dreamed of the fire. And he knew, with the certainty of a man who had stared death in the face 1,000 times, that the hardest part of his journey wasn't over. It was just beginning. The Emperor is coming, and Rhys Varkis is about to stand trial before the ruler of 1,000 worlds. If you're enjoying this clash of human grit and alien power, make sure you're subscribed with notifications on. You won't want to miss the finale. The next morning, the sky of Tartarus 7 didn't just lighten, it was conquered. Rhys Varkis stood at the edge of the forward base, watching the arrival of the High Archon. He had seen the colony ship Erebus Dawn burn in the atmosphere, a memory of fire and failure. But this was something else. A vessel the size of a small moon descended through the cloud layer, its hull a seamless expanse of shifting white gold and starlight. It didn't fight the gravity of the Deathworld, it ignored it. The engines didn't roar, they hummed with a terrifying subsonic vibration that Rhys felt in his teeth. It was the Sovereign's will, the flagship of the Aeluri Armada. The ship settled into the cleared landing zone with the precision of a scalpel, crushing the iron-hard trees beneath its landing struts as if they were dry twigs. A ramp extended, wide enough to march a legion abreast. Rhys adjusted the collar of the clean tunic the aliens had given him. It felt too soft, too light. He felt naked without his leather jerkin, though he had insisted on keeping his ironwood bow and the knife at his hip. The guards had hesitated, but Praetor Dax had simply nodded. You don't disarm a predator when you invite him to dinner. A procession emerged from the ship. At the front were soldiers in ceremonial armor, their gold plating gleaming even under the sullen, sulphurous sun of Tartarus 7. But Rhys's eyes locked onto the figure in the center. High Archon Zaeltharion, the god emperor of the Aeluri. He was taller than his soldiers, nearly 8 feet of regal power. He wore no helmet, his face exposed to the toxic air as if daring the planet to poison him. His robes were woven from light-refracting silk, but beneath them Rhys saw the bulk of armor. His skin was the color of deep space, dark blue and star-flecked, and his eyes burned with an ancient, psychic weight. This wasn't just a politician. This was a warlord who had united 1,000 stars. Cerys, standing beside Rhys, let out a cry that broke the oppressive silence. Father. She didn't run like a princess. She ran like a child. She bolted across the open ground, her small legs pumping, ignoring protocol, ignoring dignity. Rhys tensed, his hand hovering over his knife. He watched the Emperor's reaction. If he scolded her, if he rejected her. But the God Emperor didn't scold. He dropped to one knee, the impact cracking the stone beneath him, and opened his arms. Cerys collided with him, burying her face in his chest. The giant alien wrapped his arms around her, burying his face in her dark hair. Across the distance, Rhys heard a sound that transcended species, the broken, jagged sob of a parent who had thought their world was ended, only to have it returned. For a long minute the Empire stopped. There was no protocol. Just a father and his daughter in the mud of a hell planet. Then Aeluri stood up. He kept one hand on Cerys's shoulder, his grip protective, possessive. Cerys spoke rapidly, pointing back at Rhys, her hands making the shapes of the bow, the fire, the cave. She was telling the story again. The Emperor's gaze lifted. It crossed the 100 yards of open ground and locked onto Rhys Varkis. Rhys didn't look away. You don't look away from a predator. He stood his ground, feet shoulder-width apart, chin up. He was a human, a Deathworlder, and he had kept that man's daughter alive when his entire technological empire had failed. He had nothing to apologize for. The Emperor began to walk. The royal guard scrambled to keep up, but he waved them back. He walked alone, his strides eating up the distance. As he got closer, Rhys saw the details. The lines of stress around the Emperor's eyes. The raw, unfiltered emotion that cracked his stoic mask. Zael stopped 3 feet from Rhys. Up close, the alien radiated power, a physical pressure like standing next to a reactor core. They stared at each other. The survivor and the sovereign. You, the Emperor said. His voice was like grinding tectonic plates, deep and resonant. He spoke English, heavily accented but precise. You are the Terran. Rhys Varkis. That's me, Rhys said, his voice raspy. Your kid is tough. She has good instincts. The Emperor looked down at Cerys, then back at Rhys. He looked at the burns on Rhys's hands, still wrapped in alien bandages. He looked at the crude knife on his belt. He looked at the scars that mapped Rhys's face. My fleet scanned this quadrant for 3 weeks, Zael said quietly. We have sensors that can detect a neutrino shift in a vacuum. We have soldiers who can kill with a thought. And yet, we found nothing but silence. He took a step closer. How did a human with no technology, no support, and no hope succeed where my empire failed? Rhys shrugged, a purely human gesture of indifference. You were looking for a signal, Your Highness. I was listening for a cry. And on my world you don't give up. You just dig in. The Emperor stared at him for a long, stretching moment. The air crackled with tension. Praetor Dax, standing nearby, held his breath. Then, Aeluri, the ruler of the Aeluri Dominion, the God Emperor of the 12 systems, did the unthinkable. He stepped back. He adjusted his robes. And slowly, deliberately, he sank to both knees. He bowed his head until his forehead touched the dirt of Tartarus 7. The Empire is in your debt, Zael's voice rang out, amplified by the silence. You gave me back my heart. Behind him, the gasp was audible. But then a ripple effect. The royal guard knelt. The technicians knelt. The pilots knelt. In seconds, Rhys Varkis was the only being standing in a sea of bowing aliens. Rhys felt the blood rush to his face. He hated this. He hated the pomp. He reached down and grabbed the Emperor's shoulder, a breach of protocol that probably carried a death sentence, and hauled the giant alien up. Stand up, Rhys grunted. You're getting your silk dirty. And besides, she saved me just as much as I saved her. Zael looked at the human hand on his royal shoulder. He didn't strike it away. He covered it with his own massive hand and squeezed. Then come with us, Zael said. Leave this rock. Let us repay you. Rhys looked back at the Trilene one last time. He thought about his dugout. He thought about the peace of the silence. But then he looked at Cerys, who was watching him with wide, pleading eyes. All right, Rhys said. But I'm driving. The journey to the Aeluri homeworld, Aelura Prime, took a week. For Rhys it was a week of culture shock. He went from sleeping on dirt to sleeping on a mattress that adjusted to his bone density. He ate food that dissolved on his tongue like flavored clouds. He spent most of the time in the observation deck, staring at the warp streaks of faster-than-light travel. Praetor Dax joined him often, asking questions about Earth, about human history. You are a strange species, Dax noted one evening. You evolved on a Class-5 Deathworld, yet you speak of art and poetry. You are soft on the outside, but your bones are like granite. We call it the switch, Rhys explained, watching the stars blur. Humans are polite. We like peace. But if you push us, if you threaten what's ours, we turn the switch off. And when the switch is off, we don't stop until there's nothing left to fight. Dax nodded slowly. I believe I have seen this switch. It is terrifying. When they arrived at Aeluri Prime, Rhys realized the scale of what he had stepped into. The planet was a jewel, oceans of sapphire, continents of emerald. The capital city was a spire forest of crystal and light that pierced the clouds. Flying vehicles wove through the air like schools of fish. The sovereigns will docked at the Imperial Palace, a structure larger than the entire city Rhys had grown up in on Earth. They were met by crowds. Millions of Aeluri lined the causeways, cheering, weeping, throwing flowers. The news had spread, the lost princess was found. And the Earthwalker was with her. Rhys tried to stay in the background, but Saris wouldn't let him. She held his hand tight, dragging him into the spotlight. Every time the crowd saw him, the scarce, leather-clad human walking among gods, they fell silent, then erupted in a different kind of cheer. A roar of respect. The climax came the next day. The throne room. If the ship was impressive, the throne room was overwhelming. It was a cavern of white stone and gold, large enough to hold a thunderstorm. Sunlight streamed through a ceiling made of diamond glass. Thousands of dignitaries from 100 species filled the galleries. Insectoid ambassadors, energy beings in containment suits, reptilian warlords. They were all there to see the Emperor. And the human. Rhys walked down the central aisle. The sound of his heavy combat boots on the polished floor echoed sharply, a stark contrast to the silent gliding of the Aeluri. He felt 1,000 eyes on him, weighing him, judging him. Is this the hero? This small, soft thing? He reached the foot of the dais. Zael Therian sat on a throne of floating obsidian shards. Saris sat beside him on a smaller throne, looking regal in formal robes, though she flashed Rhys a quick, conspiratorial grin. Rhys stopped. He didn't bow. He stood at ease, hands clasped behind his back, looking the Emperor in the eye. The court murmured. Insolence? Arrogance? Zael stood up, silencing the room with a gesture. Citizens of the Dominion, Zael's voice boomed. You look at this human and you see a primitive. You see a species that has barely left its own gravity well. You see softness. The Emperor descended the steps, walking until he stood face to face with Rhys. But I see the truth, Zael continued, his voice dropping to a dangerous rumble. I sent my best soldiers to Tartarus 7. The gravity crushed them. The air choked them. The predators hunted them. My technology failed. My logic failed. He placed a hand on Rhys's shoulder. This man survived there for 7 years. Alone. He did not just survive, he conquered. And when he found my daughter, he did not ask for a reward. He did not check her political status. He saw a life, and he protected it with a ferocity that shames us all. Zael turned to the crowd, raising Rhys's hand in the air. We call ourselves the masters of the stars. But the humans, they are the masters of will. They are Deathworlders. And they are our friends. The Emperor looked down at Rhys. Rhys Varkis, you have no family on Earth. The crash took them. You have no home. I made my peace with that, Rhys said quietly. Then make peace with this, Zael said. From this day forth you are kin. You are warden of the inner circle. You are the brother of the Emperor. Zael knelt again just for a second, a private gesture for Rhys alone. Welcome home, brother. Rhys looked up at the gallery. He saw Dax Draven nodding respectfully. He looked at Saris, beaming with pride. He looked at the vast, terrifying, beautiful expanse of the alien empire. He realized he wasn't a ghost anymore. He wasn't just a survivor. Thank you, Rhys said, his voice thick with emotion. But if I'm staying, I'm going to need to teach your cooks how to make a decent burger. The Emperor laughed, a sound that shook the crystal windows. It shall be done. Rhys Varkis smiled. For 7 years he had fought to stay alive. Now, standing in the heart of the galaxy, surrounded by a family he never expected to find, he was finally ready to start living. And that is the chronicle of Rhys Varkis, the human who taught an empire that the strongest metal isn't forged in a furnace, but in the human spirit. If you enjoyed this journey from the hell of Tartarus 7 to the throne of Aeluri Prime, please smash that like button and subscribe. Check out the playlist on your screen for more tales of humanity's journey through the stars, and let me know in the comments. If you were stranded on a death world, what is the one item you'd want with you? Thanks for watching Echoes of Sci-Fi, and I'll see you in the next transmission.